Welcome. This is Professor Jason Finley, or Dr. Jason Finley, and this is the Introduction to Physical Geography, Geography 1. As you can see from this image, what I want to do is talk about specific examples of what physical geographers do. And polar bears standing on a small piece of ice is indicative of climate change, one of the topics that we'll talk about in this course. In addition to learning about physical geography, we're also going to have skills, at least hopefully you will build skills that are essential for career and for life in general. These include critical thinking, analytical or problem-solving thinking, scientific thinking, writing skills that we'll be writing in this class, and teamwork, especially when it comes to discussions. One of the things that we talk about in physical geography is drought. And back in August of 2016, we were in one of the worst droughts of recent history. In fact, Los Angeles County, at least much of it, was in the worst drought category, which is exceptional drought. Later, about a year later now, we still have some areas of drought. Los Angeles County is still in a drought, but it's not as severe. Let's hope that this winter coming up, we will have more rain and not another dry winter that we've had before. So as I mentioned before, we had a dry winter. In fact, we were about 10 inches away from normal rainfall. So now, as of May 29th, we are in a severe drought. And unless we get a lot of rain this summer, it looks like we're going to be in this kind of drought for at least a few months. And let's hope that we have a wet winter coming up. Something else we talk about, weather, and more specifically severe weather. In this case, we're looking at lightning. Now, lightning is something that, as you'll see in a second, isn't very common in California, especially compared to much of the rest of this country. However, we had a deadly lightning strike back in July of 2014 right here in Venice Beach, and it was in the summertime, which is very rare for thunderstorms at the beach. So where do we see thunderstorms? Well, thunderstorms are often in the East Coast and especially in Florida. This map down here in the lower right is the number of lightning fatalities from 1959 to 2013. 471 in Florida. Compare that to 32 in California. So California definitely has lightning. It's just not as frequent as it is farther east in our country. When it comes to weather fatalities, lots of people think that hurricanes and tornadoes are number one. Technically, and this is the case around the world, heat is the number one weather killer. And we'll talk a little bit about heat when it comes to climate change a bit later. Sticking with the realm of physical geography, if we go back down to the surface of the Earth and its interior, we will talk about earthquakes and volcanoes. This is showing you damage from the Northridge earthquake back on January 17, 1994. What's interesting, though, is almost exactly 20 years later, on January 17, 2014, there was a minor earthquake in the nearby area. Just a reminder that we live in earthquake country here. A few years ago, I visited the Big Island of Hawaii, and I experienced an earthquake because of the volcanoes that are there. So you're looking up part way to the top of Mauna Loa. I started around probably close to sea level, where we had warm tropical weather, and ascended about 10,000 feet, and it got really cold, and you can see fog in this picture. Another volcano in Hawaii, Mount Kilauea, was erupting actually when I was there, and it's been semi-continuously erupting since 1983. Quite a long time. I also visited Iceland recently, and Iceland is an island nation that is being ripped apart by converging, or I should say actually diverging plates or plate boundaries. And we're going to talk about that and the role of plates, the role of the solid part of the Earth in creating earthquakes and volcanoes. We'll talk about that later in the course. But right here, I'm standing on both the North American plate and the Eurasian plate. This shows you a little bit better of a rift that is forming in land, or on the land, and inside, down deep into the land. And this rift is one of very many valleys that are created in Iceland, along with volcanoes that are, that could erupt at any time. Here's one interesting volcano. It's a caldera, and this volcano actually has a lake that has formed due to rainfall or sometimes snowpack. This was also used as an amphitheater for the Icelandic pop star Bjork back in the 1990s. It's quite an amazing setting for a concert. Now you might think Iceland is full of ice, but technically its neighbor Greenland and some of the Arctic Ocean is covered in ice. But that's changing. So we have climate change, another topic of physical geography. And this is showing you that the extent of sea ice is shrinking, at least from 1980 to 2012. As I flew home from Iceland, I flew over Greenland. And this is in the summertime. And you still see ice there. But the coverage of ice or glaciers is actually decreasing in Greenland. And that can have an impact on our sea levels. In fact, this is a hypothetical map of the Los Angeles area, based on the fact that if all of the land ice, not the sea ice, if all the land ice melted, it would raise our sea level about 260 feet. Now that's not good because you could see much of Los Angeles and Orange County actually will be underwater. Woodland Hills may be okay, but the rest of the Los Angeles area would not be okay. And this map shows you some funny names here of hypothetical areas if they were underwater. So this brings me back to what physical geography is. And before we get into that, I love this quote. This quote is from an older textbook. People live on the surface of the earth in a physical environment that is extraordinarily complex, extremely diverse, yet ultimately fragile. This highlights the importance of understanding geography, especially physical geography, in an age that we have now where we have to deal with climate change and species extinctions. We really need to look at how our environment is changing. And that's what physical geography can do. Let's take a step back. What exactly is geography? You may have had a geography class in high school or maybe not since middle school, but you might not really know how to describe or define geography. One of the definitions that typically comes up is that geography is the study of the earth. And that's correct, but we can get more specific here. Geography technically is the spatial analysis of the distribution of Earth phenomena. So the key word is spatial analysis. So we look at the Earth across its spatial domain, and we don't just look at where things are, we look at why things are where they are. And in this course, we're looking at the physical elements, such as air, water, land, energy, and even life, and how they are distributed across the earth, why they are like that, and what are all the connections. So we're not just going to learn about where state capitals are or certain countries are. We are actually going to look at the processes behind the physical elements. We're going to look at the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, the biosphere, and see how they're all connected to create the physical elements of the earth. So Geography isn't really unique when it comes to the stuff that we're studying, the knowledge. Other disciplines also study this, but they don't look at it necessarily through a spatial lens. So our method of studying the Earth is looking at it spatially and looking at it holistically and using connections between certain things. So, for example, meteorology, I have a degree in meteorology and we focus just on the weather. Somebody else may have a degree in geology and they focus on rocks and the solid part of the Earth. But geography puts all those pieces together and looks at the elements of the physical part of the Earth through a spatial lens.